Hi guys, it's Tom again, and Lewis.
Hey,
Perfect timing. Lewis did
very good.
it. Yeah, and Tim will
Yeah.
probably be joining us here in a little bit. He said he was going to be probably running a little late, but thank you, Lewis, for being here.
Oh, well, thank you for having me as always.
All right. And thank you to the watchers because we provide these shows first and foremost for you, the watchers, for your entertainment. And we are not by any means and do not claim to be scholars and experts in any of the topics we cover. We're simply enthusiasts and storytellers who have fun with these topics while doing our best to respect individual beliefs. And please remember that this show is live and nothing is rehearsed or edited out later. What you see is what you get. Now, the only exception to that is our revisited shows, where I'll go back and edit them down because this service we use, StreamYard, only allows an hour for a pre-recorded show. So, speaking of, how many of you caught last week's show, our revisited show with none? How long have I been doing this, Lewis? You're on my left. See, I ought to remember the orientation. Lewis was our very first special guest on our third show about Southern Spirit Guide. Okay. See, you're doing it too.
Yeah.
It's hard to get used to because I've been doing it, a year and a half? Hey, we have a comment already. Hi, Tom. Well, hello. Which we are broadcasting in our group and not on the page. And for some reason, StreamYard requires you to give them permission to use your name when we're in a group. I don't know why. I don't understand that. But anyway, if you are watching in the Strange Friends group, there's a link up top that says give StreamYard your permission to use your name. So if you want to comment, because I don't know who that was, on my end, it just says Facebook user. So if you could give StreamYard your permission to use your name, and then I'll know who's commenting. I'd certainly appreciate that. But we appreciate the watchers watching. And like I said, on our last Saturday show was Southern Spirit Guide. I got it that time. Lewis Powell the fourth. You'll get the hang of it. I haven't. And he was telling some of the spooky tales of the Southeast that he's uncovered. And even though we didn't really get to it in that show, we kind of did, but we really didn't focus on it. His Haunted Alabama book that he has written. He did touch on a couple of stories in there. We did talk about some, which I'm going to talk about one here in a minute, and our ET facts, and you probably know which one I'm going to talk about because it is my favorite little ghost story, and what's it's kind of a ghost story conspiracy theory if you think about it that way. But anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. But our Strange Journeys Revisited. Go back and watch that. It's the first half, and then next week we'll be playing the second half of that show with Lewis right there. And some cool stories in that. You need to go check that out. And then week before last, 2 weeks ago, our live show was Strange Highways 1 because I had so much information, we had to split it into two. And so we're coming back this week and we're going to be going back into it. Hey, there's Tim. Tim made it. Glad to see you back. I feel like you need to reintroduce yourself. It's been so long.
Has it been that long?
Well, I know at least 2, maybe 3 shows. I don't
3
remember.
Episodes. So the
Yeah.
first one was in Arizona, and then the last 2 taking care of health issues between neighbors and my wife. So.
Well, look, it's happened the same thing. Remember, I was out for my vacation, and then I thought, well, I'll be back and get going. And then all of a sudden, the issues with my son, and then I was out for a while. So the same thing with you. You went on vacation, and then other things started interfering. So,
right.
All right.
Did I just hear a horse in the background?
I think it was a grandkid.
Probably a grandchild, yes.
It sounded like a horse for a moment.
They are in the living room in the other room, and we've got one that she's kind of loud sometimes. So
Right.
Oh,
Well, before we go any further, I want to especially thank our watchers right now, because I know that Florida is playing Alabama at this moment. It's on in the other room. And if you've chosen to watch us talk about weird, strange stuff, then I think you're cool. You're awesome. And I appreciate you being a watcher. Ta-da. You are the watchers, and you're awesome. Thank you for being here. All right, Tim, are you ready for ET Facts? Lewis, are you ready for ET Facts?
as ready as I think I'll ever be.
Well, see, I know Lewis and Tim. Well, I guess I can include myself. There's a handicap here because I know both of you are tour guides, both of you are researchers and historians, and to pick out one single. Okay, all right. So for those of you that are watching, the ET Facts this week is, what is your favorite ghost story of all time? So that makes it tough. I understand. I really do, because ever since I came up with this idea, I was like, "Oh my God, what am I gonna what this no that one, you know?" But I settled on one that's actually is my favorite, and so I just one ghost story, guys, because I know both of you have tons of them. So do I. So one ghost story, Lewis, that stands out as one of your favorites. I'll give y'all it doesn't have to be the most favorite, okay? But a favorite ghost story. And I told them, and folks over there watching, I told them before the show started, I don't want you to just tell me, okay, this is my favorite ghost story. You've got to tell the ghost story. Okay.
There was a story that I read. I was probably in elementary school when I read this book. Michael Norman and Beth Scott's Haunted Heartland. And this was a story that it happened in a private home. I think there was something about it had been built on an Indian graveyard or something of that nature. But I distinctly remember this one story where this guy is sitting at home alone and he's listening to the radio, I imagine probably early 70s. And he, as he's listening to the radio, he hears the radio kind of do that frequency squeal. And he looks up and he has a lit candle sitting on the coffee table in front of him. That lit candle levitates and then slowly points its way towards his heart, and then slowly just sets back down on the table. I remember reading that story as I'm in a car on a family vacation, and I just remember my blood running cold. And so that's a story that I guess you could consider a favorite. It's a story I'll always remember.
Oh, and where were you going at the time?
I think we were probably heading to Destin, Florida.
Oh, vacation.
Yes.
All right. Cool. All right. Tim, you're muted.
I said, are they texting you the scores? Is that what's going on in the background with the phone?
No, my phone was ringing. But yes, it is updating me. It is updating me. As a matter of fact, it's 7-3 right now, but Alabama. But I'm not focusing on that, folks. Actually, I was trying to get some stuff done in the background for my story, which I had decided on my story just before we were to go on the air, and I was like, oh crap. And so I was trying to get everything together. So, okay, Tim.
We'll lay some background on this real quick. Topeka, of course, is where Brown versus the Board of Education takes place. It's where segregation really comes to an end in the United States. And one of the reasons for that is that segregation in Kansas, particularly in the city of Topeka, had already ended by the late 1920s. We were already desegregating in schools and everything. So there was a lot going on here. One of the biggest people that was an influence in that was a man by the name of Henry Jones. Now, Henry Jones was a black man. He had lived in Kansas most of his life. In 1863, on August 21st, he was supposed to report to the city of Lawrence to muster for the 1st Kansas Volunteer Colored Infantry. He missed the Lawrence massacre by an hour, was how far behind he was. He just barely missed it. Not bad at all. He went on from there to be a Buffalo soldier. There are accounts of him holding off a group of Indians outside the city of Hayes while in a culvert underneath the railroad with nothing more than his pistol. So you can understand where he comes from. So he had this huge illustrious career in the military. In fact, he was actually a sergeant by the time he finally leaves the military and returns to the city of Topeka, where he'll live out the rest of his life. He dies in 1923. And so he was accepted at the white counters. Back then you still had segregation. You couldn't eat at the white counter. You couldn't drink at the white drinking fountain. You weren't allowed to sit in the same seats. And that didn't happen with him. He was very well accepted. But he talked about late in his life, he talks about that he loved baseball, and he'd fallen in love with baseball during the Civil War. Which is really when America really starts developing its form of baseball. Let's make it clear. Right. It's a very different game. But what happens is that he, in 1905, he decides that he's going to go to a baseball game in the city of Topeka. And at the time, we had 5 minor league baseball teams, including the White Sox had their farm team in Topeka at the time. So you can imagine what's going on. And he was all excited about this game because he could get into the game for 5 cents. It also got him a hot dog, 2 cups of beer, and a bag of peanuts. You can't beat that price.
That's a day, man.
Right. 5 cents back then wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was still a big deal to him. And he was excited because his favorite team was going to play. The Topeka Shawnees were his favorite team. And they were supposed to face off with the University of Kansas Jayhawks, is who they were going against, the Kansas University Jayhawks. And so he was super excited for the game, and his wife kept telling him, Uncle Henry, you're going to miss the last trolley back to North Topeka. And he said, no, I promise you at 7 o'clock when the last trolley leaves Topeka, I'll be on it headed for North Topeka. He shows up at the game at noon. The game is supposed to start at 1. He plans on sitting there and watching what's going on and watching the 2 teams warm up, and he's having a great time. And 1 o'clock rolls around, the game doesn't start. Finally wanders down to the dugout to find out what's going on. And the Topeka Shawnees tell him, well, Uncle Henry, our star pitcher is from Pauline, Kansas. His horse must have thrown a shoe or something. And sure enough, the star pitcher finally shows up at 3 o'clock.
Oh, God.
Now, the Topeka Journal says it was the best game ever seen in the United States. I don't know how true that is. I do know that the final score of the game was the Topeka Shawnees 106 to the Kansas University Jayhawks 97.
Wow.
Now, I try to explain the scoring of baseball was very different back then. And I did find out that for a game to go for both teams to hit 100 points was not uncommon to happen then.
Wow.
Because it happened to be how many times you bagged the base or how you caught the ball. There was different ways that they scored. But he missed the trolley. And it was like 8, 9 o'clock at night. And it's dark. And he got to 6th and Kansas Avenue. And he said that he heard something behind him. And he said it was a small white kitten. Couldn't have been any more than 6 or 8 inches. And he ignored it, thinking, you want to know, if I bring home another animal, my wife is going to kill me. He made it down the street to about 5th and Kansas when he turned around again because of the noise behind him. And at this point, he says that kitten was now about the size of a house cat. Now, no kitten could change from a kitten to a house cat in less than a block. He made about 3 or 4 more blocks down the road, and he said he turned around, and it was about the size of a bobcat. When he got to 1st in Kansas, he was extremely scared. He'd been walking fairly quickly, and he turns around at 1st in Kansas, and he says it's the size of a mountain lion, at which point he runs as fast as he can. And he goes up over the top of the Kansas Avenue Bridge, and from the top of the Kansas Avenue Bridge, he's looking back, and he sees this thing, and he says it's the size of a bear. Now we know no kitten can go from kitten to bear in about 7 blocks, but he runs the rest of the way home, and his wife would antagonize him for the rest of his life about that because he had run home from a baseball game because he was chased by a small white kitten. He showed up in town the next day, and he started to tell one of the countermen at one of the cafes that story. And he started to tell them about the baseball game. And the counterman says, no, Uncle Henry, you have to understand. Last night about 9:30 at the Kansas Avenue Bridge, 2 criminals who were about to rob somebody were attacked by a giant white cat.
Wow.
Now, the newspapers say that the claw marks inside these people were 2 and 3 inches deep. Now, Uncle Henry would claim for the rest of his life that he had been protected by a ghost cat. In 1905, about 2 months prior to this, there had been a train leaving Topeka headed east towards Lawrence that made about a mile out of town when it tipped over. It was a circus train. They lost 2 albino white male lion tigers, or white male lions. I think, honestly, it was one of the lions in town because there would be 20 more attacks during the course of the next year. But Uncle Henry claimed it was a ghost cat.
Well, what I was thinking was that he had more than 1 nickel in his pocket.
Right.
And he took care of some more of those cups of beer.
Right, exactly.
And several nickels in his pocket.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. That's in your book, isn't it?
It is in one of my books, yeah.
I think it's in Prairie Ghosts.
It may be in Prairie Ghosts, yeah.
Come on, you wrote the thing.
I don't remember what's in either book at this point. At this point, my concentration has been on Quantrill and the Radom Massacre of Lawrence, and I'm going like 15 million different directions on that at the moment.
I understand. I understand. All right, before we get to my story, I want to remind you, watchers, that you can go to, you see it scrolling across the bottom down there, strangestuff.live, and you can get special watchers attire. Okay? Just go to strangestuff.live and type in that SJW15. That's Strange Journeys Watchers. SJW15 for a 15% discount. So do that now. All right. The one I'm going to tell, I've told it on here before, but I'll just tell an abbreviated version. And it is actually in Southern Spirit Guides Haunted Alabama. Now, and you've heard me talk about that this show is the outgrowth of our tours that we used to take in Mobile, downtown Mobile, called Strange Journeys. And when I'd say about 20 years ago, I moved back into Mobile, and I started digging into one story that I'd heard, and so I wanted to know more about it. So I started finding everything I could on the internet. I went down to the local history and genealogy department of the Mobile Public Library and found what I could. But in 1834, a man named Charles R.S. Boyington was accused of the murder of his friend Nathaniel Frost. Now, he and Nathaniel had been seen the night before the murder in Church Street Cemetery. And the day of the murder, Nathaniel Frost's body was found in the cemetery with 17 stab wounds. Now, what does that reek of? I mean, that's 17. That's a crime of passion. I mean, it's not just, that's not just give me your money. That's not just revenge. That's, you know, well, you said it, Lewis, overkill, you know. There's actually more to the story. But an abbreviated version is, of course, Boyington is arrested, taken to trial, and convicted and sentenced to death. And on the day of his execution, it was later in early part of 1835, he was asked if he would like to have any last words. And every rendition of the story I've come across, all say the same thing. He spoke for about 2 hours, recounting his innocence. And I even have a copy of the book where he wrote down his story while in prison before his execution. And it's a unique point of view. There are so many more details to this story. It's amazing. But eventually the executioner, again, there's different variations of this story, but the executioner got tired of hearing him raving on for so long. And so he gets up onto the platform where the noose is and tries to get the noose around Charles's neck. And they struggle and they fall off of the platform. And supposedly Boyington broke his neck and died. I have not been able to uncover where the execution took place, but he was to be buried, and he could not be buried in Church Street Graveyard, which was the Mobile City graveyard at the time, because he was a convicted murderer. So he had to be buried outside of the graveyard. And they buried him in what was called the Gravekeeper's Garden. Now, I don't know if that was just a place like Boot Hill out west where they buried criminals. But one of the last things that Charles Boyington said in his farewell speech was that proof of his innocence would be that an oak tree would emerge and grow from his grave. Now, the legend states that an oak tree did grow from his grave, and that at certain times at night, if you're there, you can hear the whisperings and the declarations of Charles Boyington declaring his innocence. And even though I've been there multiple times, I've never heard it. Some say they have. But to me, the controversy comes in. This is the accepted oak tree. And I say accepted, they've actually put a historical plaque there now, naming this specific tree as Charles Boyington's oak. Now, the reason I take issue with it is because of a picture that was in the book written in the early 1900s called The Tree Being the Strange Case of Charles R.S. Boyington, and written by a French guy. But anyway, this picture was in the book. And this is the tree they say it is. Now, if you'll look, see the distance between the tree and the wall. And see the distance between the tree and the wall here. I mean, it looks like it's closer to the wall in this drawing of supposedly the actual grave and oak tree of Charles Boyington. This picture was drawn probably 70 years or so after, 65 years or so after Charles Boyington made the declaration. And then this picture was taken within the last, say, 20 years. It doesn't look much different than that. Also, another thing to look at, how many major trunks are coming out of, or major limbs are coming out of the tree?
2, maybe 3.
Yeah, there's actually 2, because like I said, I've been there. I've been on site. And in here, how many major trunks limbs do you see coming out of the trunk?
Looks like 3.
Mm-hmm. Now, there are only 3 oak trees in this area. The one that they say is his oak tree. Another one that is just a single, like a major trunk going up and then smaller branches coming off. And then there's this one. And how many main limbs do you see coming off of the trunk?
3.
There are 3. And look how close it is to the wall. Now, this is a picture I took myself, and when I was doing some research down there. And if you'll notice how close the wall is as well. Now, that's not the original wall. I'll tell you that straight up. But the thing is, I've actually gotten down on my hands and knees and dug down below the wall and found the foundations of the original wall. They built that wall on top of the original. So, again, I think that's where the controversy comes in. Historically, they say this is the tree, but according to this was well over 100 years ago that this was published in the book.
Right.
And I would take that as more of an authority than anybody else, but that's just me. And I used to tell them on the tour, we would do investigations around the tree and get different findings, and I would leave it up to the people themselves on the tour. I'm not here to cause controversy. It just, to me, it looks like that may not be the tree. It could be this other one over here. But that's my favorite ghost story. I've told folks the only way we can know for sure is to get ground penetrating radar in there and find out exactly where he's buried. And nobody's going to pay to do that. I do understand that. If I get excessively wealthy and have a couple $100,000 I don't want to do it, I will hire somebody to go in there and do ground penetrating radar, and we can settle that controversy once and for all. But the legend states that you can hear Charles Boynton still declaring his innocence to this day. There's so much more to this story, folks. We could probably do a show on it, but there was a forlorn lover. There was money. I mean, it was all kind of stuff. But you can read a basic synopsis of the legend in Lewis Powell IV's Southern Spirit Guides, Haunted Alabama. So pick you up a copy of that. All right. I spent too much time on that, guys. I'm sorry. And speaking of ghost stories, we want to hear yours. All right, we got some more comments during that time. Was that you, Tim, speaking to somebody? No, somebody said thank you, Tim. And again, I do apologize on any comments that come in from Facebook. I'm not able to see who is doing it. Just says Facebook user. And if you'll go to the link above this post or in this post for StreamYard, you can give them permission. But somebody said, hi, Carmen. Hi, Christine. Somebody said, great to see you both.
I did
with us.
to our
Thank
guests
you,
because they
Tim.
were saying hello to us just a few minutes ago.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can't see who they are. So you're not logged in under me, Tim?
Not today.
Okay, that's fine.
I was trying to rush because we had done the whole pumpkin patch thing today. So.
Oh, fun. All right, well, let's get through to this and get into the show.
Click that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel.
And of course, I had to add my grandson on there. And please do as he asked and click the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and help us do more of this. And if you can help us do more of this by becoming a patron on Patreon, we would certainly appreciate it. And it takes a little bit, and that's all we're asking is for a little bit of help. So if you could help us out on Patreon, we would certainly appreciate it. Patreon.com/Strange Journeys. Or, I'd forgot about this. I've got this set up. You can go to that linktr.ee/Strange Journeys, and that's a link to everything Strange Journeys. That's everything, every link we have, every social media site, everything at that link tree. And Christine just commented. She said, "Hi Tom, this is Christine. I remember the story you just told on your tour. Yes, that was the I guess you call it my anchor story. We did a whole tour and did all around, came around, and then the major story at the end of the tour was Boynton Oak, and we had a great time on that. And that's where we met Christine when she came on the tour, and I think she came on 2 or 3 after that. So that was a great way to meet folks and make some lifelong friends. Christine has been a friend ever since, and we've enjoyed it. And we're going to, as soon as Christine can clear her schedule, we're going to do a Strange Authors Christine Rogers and talk about some of her books. She writes paranormal fiction, and so as soon as we can get schedules worked out, we're going to do that show. Now, 2 weeks ago, we started our strange journeys into strange highways, and we picked back up where we left off there. And it's time for another road trip. And I'm sending you guys a message to okay. Tim has got to leave us early. So
today is the town I live in is celebrating the 200th anniversary of the opening of the Santa Fe Trail, which opened in
cool.
would be 1821. In fact, the town that I live in was one of the major hubs of the Santa Fe Trail.
That's right. I remember
It's
saying
one of
that
the
it was
places.
a big place in front.
It used to be back in the 1800s. There were 30,000 people living here. Now there's less than 1,000. So you can imagine just how much the town has shrunk in the last 200 years. But we still have the street out here on our main road is so wide that we can park on both the outsides and the middle of the road with traffic going both directions because of the fact they used to bring the wagon trains through and turn them around right in the middle of town. So it had to be extremely wide.
Yeah. All right. Well, because you've got an appointment and got to leave early, there were some areas I wanted to touch on before we got to time slips. One of the things one thing that's intrigued me about people traveling on highways is how I don't know if it's something about the movement or the distance, but this thing of time slips comes up a lot on highways and on roadways. And I wanted to start with some Bigfoot sightings, but we'll come back to that because Tim's got to go. He's actually got a couple of time slip stories that I want him to get into. But just before that, I wanted to refer back to our last show where we talked about ghost cars or ghost vehicles.
Right.
The ghost crash in Surrey, England, where the police department got phone calls about this crash, and they go check it out. There's no crash, but they find in the ditch under the overgrowth is a crashed car and then a dead body from 5 months earlier. And then on I-44 in where was that? It was between Wichita Falls and Oklahoma City. This woman says she witnessed, her and her daughter witnessed a crash on I-44. The police go there. There's nothing there. And then they learn later that there was a crash in that exact location 10 years earlier, describing what she read, described exactly what she saw. So we covered that, talking about ghost cars, but I was beginning to wonder, could that have been a time slip? Like the story that Tim's fixing to tell.
could also be, it could be a residual haunt, especially if something happened 10 years earlier. It can replay itself with that emotion that is still in the location.
Yeah. But it just reminded me of one of the stories that you had put in our notes.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead and tell those stories, and then you won't be pressed unless you had something else you wanted to share.
My wife and I moved to Kansas in 2001. And I used to work in Topeka when we first moved here. There is a major highway between us. I don't use it often. I tend to use the back roads, the little 2-lane roads. I'm the guy driving down the road, waving to everybody, as they're driving along. The good old boy. My wife be like, "Who is that?" I have no idea. I just waved. It's all good. Just keep going. But I used to travel U.S. Highway 75, which is a north-south throughout the United States, goes all the way down into Texas, and all the way north, I think, as far as Minnesota. So it's a really long highway. But right outside the city of Topeka, as you come up into the city of Topeka, there's actually a ridge that as you hit the top of that ridge, it used to be that you could see the Capitol building. And the Capitol building is still a good 10 miles from this spot there. Now, M&M Mars has put in a plant that is in the way. You can't quite see see it anymore. But as we were going through one day, my wife and I were driving up to Topeka to go do something. And as we came up over that ridge, both she and I noticed what looked like a huge tornado. And it would have been massive, probably half a mile to a mile wide. I mean, it was just throwing things around. I mean, the destruction in front of us was huge. And one of the things that I remember most about that is that we could see the Capitol, and there was a huge hole inside the Capitol dome on the south, would be the southwest side of the building.
Wow.
And I thought, man, this is incredible, because we've been listening to the radio. You would think that as we were listening to the radio, we would have been able to hear there was a tornado inside the city, because you could see fires, you could see buildings that had been blown over.
Wow.
Like I said, you could see the Capitol dome, and it lasted like 2 or 3 seconds, and then was just gone. And my wife and I are just like, did you just see what I saw? Did you see a tornado out there? Because it wasn't there. And looking back now, after having become a researcher here in Kansas and doing as much research as I've done, I've learned a lot. Topeka has one of the very first major tornadoes, an F5, to hit a city in the United States in 1966. Wow. It cut a path a mile wide and 17 miles long through the city of Topeka. It did a huge amount of damage, and the stories that I've heard later about the destruction are just incredible. One thing that I didn't know here until just a few years ago, when I was reviewing, it would be 2016, as we came up on that 50th anniversary of the tornado, people started posting lots of pictures to the history groups for Topeka on the internet. And one of the pictures that I found was this huge, massive hole in the side of the Capitol dome on the southwest side where I was seeing it. And so I started doing research to find out what happened exactly. And what I found out was that there was a 1957 Chevy that the tornado picked up and threw through the Capitol dome itself. It took them 3 months to find all the parts for this car. Okay.
Oh, no.
3 months to find all the parts. And this was before some things happened after that, with the Capitol. They actually put in an inner dome now that is made of glass inside. There's now a chandelier. Neither one of those would be installed until after 1967, because you've got a suicide inside the Capitol in 1967. They decided there were some things that they wanted to prevent. If there was another tornado, they didn't want the car coming through the dome and having to find all the parts for months throughout the Capitol building. And they didn't want somebody jumping from the top of the dome again. But to me, it was like, here is this incredible amount of damage that we were looking at. And some of the familiar things, the Topeka Heartland racetrack was not there at the when we saw all this. We were seeing a gas station that probably hasn't been in business in at least 30 years. That there was damage, glass had been blown out of it. I mean, even in those few seconds, it was really amazing to see just exactly what went on. I mean, like I said, it was only a few seconds as we're driving along that we saw all that, but it was like, was that, what was that? How did we see that?
Yeah.
And so,
Well, yeah, some of our other stories that I've got pulled out here to talk about time slips, it just makes me wonder: are you just you looking through like a opening? Are you going through and you're actually there, or is it just something you're seeing or experiencing? It's hard to imagine, but we got several of those stories, and you had another one, didn't you?
right. It's actually on the same highway, and it's probably within a 6-month time period that this happens.
Wow.
I was coming home from Topeka, coming southbound, and there's a little town between Topeka and the exit that I would get off on to head towards the town that I live in, called Carbondale. Now, Carbondale, if you're familiar with the show Green Acres, Carbondale is really Hooterville. Let's make that very clear. Hooterville from Green Acres is now called Carbondale. But so there's some things going on there. But as I was coming home one night, I saw a sign off on would be the left-hand side of the highway. And there's nothing over on that highway. Even today, there's still nothing there. But here was this bright neon sign that was on the left-hand side of the road, and so I drove back by there the next day and pulled over because it was bothering me enough, because it's like, well, what was I seeing on that side of the highway that was lit up, this huge neon sign? And when I get over there, there's, like I said, there's nothing over there. What I did find out later is that people told me there'd actually been a diner over there in the 60s on that side of the road, that the owners had their apartment attached to it, all of which burns down in 1968 with the owners inside of it. The newspapers that I found about it said it was actually a murder-suicide, and that the husband had killed his wife and then sets the house ablaze and then kills himself as well, just to destroy what's going on. That was pretty common. It still is kind of common in some ways, but it was like, okay, was I seeing that particular sign? At that time period, I wrote a piece of fiction later where I described the sign itself in a different story where some storm steals my family and takes off with it, and I'm chasing them. Anyway, it was a science fiction piece. It was really bizarre, but it starts with that sign, and I'm like, because it haunted me for months. Here was this neat, bright neon sign in the middle of nowhere that didn't make any sense, especially since the town is actually about a little bit more than a mile to the west. So,
well, what's unique is, first off, your wife witnessed the first one with you, but in both of those instances, you were able to go back and confirm what you saw.
Right.
And so, like I said, were you just, looking through something, like looking through the looking glass, or were you actually transported there? Like we'll read about some stuff, in a second here. Wow, that's wild.
I know you all may have discussed it last time, but 75 has you were talking about the Phantom cars, and 75 has a Phantom car on it as well, closer to Galena, Kansas, which is about 6 miles from the Oklahoma border. And there's a hill there that goes up. It's fairly steep, and there's a 50 Chevy that people say will veer around them. It's baby blue. Everybody gives the same description of the car, and the tail fins on it is how we know it's a 50s Chevy. But it veers around them and cuts them off to the point they're swinging off the road and in towards the ditch and the shoulder. And every single time that happens, there's a vehicle coming down on the wrong side in their lane.
Wow.
And it's like whatever this car is cutting people off to make sure an accident doesn't happen there. In the meantime, the other driver sees this car coming at him and swings back over to their own lane.
The other way.
But it's exactly. And it's been happening since the 50s. I mean, well documented as to how often it happens, because it's happening 3-4 times a year at least. So,
well, we talked about it a little bit. We didn't have the details that you just provided. I appreciate that, because I left it in the notes, and we did talk about it for a minute, that unique thing. But probably the most famous time slip street or road is where'd I put crap? I jumped ahead and now lost my place in the notes. Yeah, Bold Street in Liverpool. Bold Street was originally laid out as a rope walk, a long, thin area of land used in the manufacture of rope. The area is actually known now as rope walks. They used to measure the rope from the top of Bold Street to the bottom because it was the standard length needed for sailing ships. It was laid out for residences around 1780 and named after Jonas Bold, a noted slave merchant, sugar trader, and banker. In 1802, Bold became the mayor of Liverpool. Now, there's just a couple of stories, and if you go on YouTube, you can find a bunch more stories about this street. It is probably the most famous time slip roadway in the world. But the story about Imogen wanted to go to Liverpool to buy her sister Abigail a few things for a new baby. Upon arriving, she was happy to see a new mother care store that had opened on the corner of Lord Street and Whitechapel. She wandered around the store, picked up a few baby items such as cardigans, baby bibs, gloves. She was surprised to see how cheap the items were, but thought they were an offer as the store just opened. Taking them to the counter, she tried to pay with her credit card. The staff member looked at her suspiciously and went off to get the manager. When she came back, she looked at the card and told Imogen that they didn't take cards. So disappointed, Imogen went and put the items back as she didn't have any money with her. When she got home, she told her mother what had happened. Her mother was surprised and really puzzled. She said, "That store closed years ago. There's a bank there now. In fact, that's where I have my account." Not believing her, Imogen took her mother back to the same place the next day. And sure enough, the store wasn't there. It just was the bank, just as her mother had told her. So did she step through a time portal? And that's the unique thing about Bold Street is it's not just like Tim was saying, where you see something. Now, we don't know if he actually moved back in time or just saw across the void. But it looks like some of these folks on Bold Street actually step into another time, right, and function and interact with the people in the different time stream. And there was a shoplifter named Sean who, while shoplifting in Liverpool back in 2006, ran away from a security guard and headed down Hanover Street. Trying to shake off the guard, Sean, who's 19, turned into a dead-end street called Brooks Alley. By this time, he was out of breath and started to get a tight sensation in his chest. He soon realized that that actually wasn't the problem with him, but the atmosphere around him. He waited for the guard to come around the corner after him, but he never appeared. So, thinking he had given him the slip, he sauntered back out and started to walk down Hanover Street again, but he soon realized that something was wrong. The road looked different. And so did even the pavement look different. He noticed the cars driving by looked old-fashioned. And the roadworks that he knew were there were now gone. Soon he saw that the people around him were wearing strange clothes. Crossing over to Bold Street, he noticed that there were traffic lights where they weren't before and bushes growing around the Lyceum near a bar that he recognized. He kept on walking and soon began to feel a panic because he knew something wasn't right. And something gave him the idea that he had stepped back in time and it was not going away. Then he remembered his cell phone and he took it out of his pocket and tried to get a signal, but of course it didn't work. And he began to panic, but he soon spotted a kiosk selling newspapers and headed over. Leaning over the stand, he looked at the front page of the Daily Post. There in bold lettering was the date, 18th of May, 1967. He wondered, what am I going to do? What happens if I can't get back to my own time? What about my family, my friends? So speeding up his pace, he reached a jewelry store and tried his phone once again. This time it worked. Sighing with relief, he looked around and realized that he had returned to the present. But the strange thing is he could still see down at the end of the road, back the direction he had come. He could still see people walking around in 1967. By this time, he had seen enough and dove into a bus to go home. When he was interviewed by the local newspaper later, he stated over 4 times the exact account. Now, you know, he was a thief, okay? He could have been making this whole thing up.
Right.
But the strange tale did not end there. When the security guard was interviewed, he stated that when he ran after Sean and turned down the dead-end alley after him, he said that Sean had completely disappeared. And when the newspaper checked out the facts of Sean's stories, they found out that everything he said was historically accurate from 1967. Wow. Anybody want to visit Bold Street? In the Bold Street area? Yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
I talk about a road trip. Next time.
You got to think too. He's got to be doing a lot of research to get the information from the newspaper right from 1967 to 2006 when he committed what was probably just a petty theft. Is probably all it was. Probably wasn't very much. So you wouldn't think he'd be making up that story. Here, let me give you the historical facts. I went and got the newspaper from the day, and I read through it to make sure that I knew all the stories.
Exactly. Yeah. He was a very dedicated shoplifter.
Right.
All right. Now we'll leave Bold Street, and another man didn't leave his name or information or where this was done, but he said, or where this happened. He said, on the night in question, I was driving home from work, having finished a late shift. After closing up the shop at 8 p.m., I headed for home along the highway. Everything was normal. After a couple of miles, there was a junction where I would turn off onto another highway for the home stretch. He said, this is where things got a little strange. That's what we like when we hear people say it got strange. As I was driving along, I started feeling sickly and got a strong metallic taste in my mouth. I also became aware that I was the only person driving on this road, which for that time of night isn't necessarily rare. It is a quiet highway, but I was extremely aware how there was just me. Then a feeling came over me that I can only describe it as pulsating. It felt like the street lights were pulsating, like when you drive past trees with sunlight shining through, that flickering but slower. I looked up at the street lights, and they weren't flickering or pulsating, but the light coming from those lights into the car was itself pulsating. After another mile or so, my turnoff came up, and I noticed there was another car in front of me. Again, like an intense awareness of it, but that car was mine. He said it was a red Ford Fiesta, and it had the exact same license plate. He said it gets stranger. As I was driving down this exit ramp following this car, my car apparently, it suddenly vanished in front of me. It literally disappeared. The second it did, however, I looked in my rearview mirror, and there was a red Ford Fiesta pulling into the exit lane. As I was focusing in my mirror and to try to see the license plate, the headlights were on after all, the car behind me disappeared. Again, it just vanished before my eyes. I couldn't comprehend what had happened. I went home a little shaken, a little disturbed. I'm not sure what happened. He says, I've researched and come across time slips, but I'm still completely and utterly dumbfounded by it all. I'm not sure what this experience was or why it happened, but it's unsettled me, and I've been uneasy driving this road since. I mean, can you imagine pulling off and you see a car in front of you, you don't think anything about it, but it's got the exact same license plate. And then as it disappeared, it's like literally a time loop right there.
Right.
It's like he drove into it and drove out of it. That's really weird. All right. Lewis, you got any time slip stories?
There was a story I recall reading in one of L.B. Taylor's books about Virginia. There was, I believe it was just a couple that were walking along the road near the Memorial Church in Jamestown. And as they were walking along, this was, I believe it was early on a Sunday morning, they suddenly began to hear the sounds of a group of people nearing them. And they look up the road to see a large group of people in colonial dress approaching them. And so they stood there by the side of the road and watched this crowd of people pass them. And they appeared to be colonial settlers who were just on their way to church. There were men, women, and children. And several of the people in the group actually acknowledged these people standing on the side of the road watching them. And they continued talking and laughing just on down the road. And the couple thought it was very strange. And of course, this is an area where there are historic reenactors,
Yeah.
but somehow this couple was able to determine that they were there before the time that the reenactors were supposed to be there. So they made this assumption that perhaps they had seen the spirits of these colonial settlers on their way to church on a typical Sunday morning.
Wow.
So that's the only story that I have encountered in much of my research that could really be considered kind of a time slip.
Yeah, and it could have been. I mean, if it were ghost, then it was residual. But if it was a time slip, then it was the. Did the couple walk into a time vortex and then it, or was it moving and passed over them? I mean, there's just so many possibilities, especially if they're standing there just watching them pass by.
Yes.
And Tim, that reminded me, Lewis had a couple of stories of moonshiners, ghost cars about them. They could hear it drive by and the clinking of the bottles knocking together, but they couldn't see a car, but they could hear the tinkling as it went by. But I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Lewis?
No.
Okay. All right. One more time slip, and the story is time is slipping away. This one in Abbeville, Louisiana. In the spring 1988 issue of Strange Magazine, Ken Moe shared and that's Meaux. I would assume it's pronounced Moe, as in Thibodeau, Deaux,
right.
Cajun. Ken Moe shared a remarkable tale about a time slip incident that occurred on Highway 167 north of Abbeville, Louisiana. It happened on October 20th, 1969. A man revealed by Moe as only LC and his business associate Charlie were driving down Highway 167 about 1:30 in the afternoon. It was a cool but comfortable day, so they had their windows rolled down. After driving for a while, they noticed a very old turtle black car traveling in the next lane over. They pulled up alongside it, matching its speed. It was mint, they said, as in perfect, clean condition, with an orange license plate dated 1940. They thought perhaps that it was off to a car show, or maybe it belonged to a collector. What was truly strange, however, was that its driver, a young woman who also appeared vintage. She wore 1940s attire, and there was a child in the passenger seat. Same deal, 1940s clothing. Their confusion turned to urgency when they realized the young woman was in distress. As Moe described, she appeared on the verge of tears. This prompted LC to ask the woman through her rolled-up car window if she needed help. She nodded yes. So he motioned her to pull over, and she nodded again. LC and Charlie then drove in front of her and pulled over to the side of the road. But when they turned to look back at the woman and her old car, expecting her to pull up behind them, she had seemingly vanished. They were alone. At that moment, another car pulled up behind LC and Charlie. Its driver jumped out, panicked, asking what had just happened to the car in front of him. From his point of view, it had simply blinked out of existence. They talked for a moment and then searched in a daze for over an hour. The woman and her car were simply gone. LC and Charlie wanted to keep the event a secret, while the third man felt they should report the incident. But what, after all, could be done? What are they going to report?
Right.
It kind of makes you wonder if they did slip into a time vortex there. What happened to the woman? she was obviously having some issues, and they wanted to help her. I mean, have you ever done that? You pull up beside somebody and windows down, you go, roll the window down, and they roll so you can talk while you're driving. It's not very safe, but we've all done it. So, but anyway, time slips. If you have a time slip story, we'd love to hear it. So let us know. That would be awesome. I mean, we love it when it's personal stories like Tim, and then Dagny shared last show about meeting Resurrection Mary. How cool was that?
Right.
Sitting in the car with Resurrection Mary
Right.
and whispering to her, and she couldn't understand what she was whispering. That was crazy. That was cool.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to move on to Bigfoot sightings and then do some UFO sightings before we close out today. Does that sound like a plan?
Yes.
The first Bigfoot sighting I want to talk about happened right close by to me, and actually, if I've got the location correctly, I actually lived within a mile or so of where this one happened. But whoops, Tim had to go. I guess it was that time. Well, yeah, it's 4:00, so they got to be somewhere at 4:30, so they had to zip on out. And
Bye, Tim.
yeah, bye, Tim. He didn't even say goodbye. Yeah. He covered for me all that time I was out, and I certainly appreciate that. And the other guys, Lewis and Andrea and John, helping out. That was awesome. In Grand Bay, Alabama, which is actually about 30 minutes from where I live now. In 1997, I didn't live there, but years later, I lived close by where I believe, if taken from their descriptions. I used to share this one on the tour because our Strange Journeys tour was more than ghost stories. We had UFO sightings, Bigfoot sightings. We've mentioned it on here before, werewolf sightings, or the wolf woman, make it accurate. It was a wolf woman sighting, even a possible chupacabra sighting in the Mobile area. And what we did on our tour was the first goal of the tours. Yeah. Tim said it's a private message, so he did kind of say goodbye. So we're good. What we did on the tour was, and of course, I used to train the other tour guides. So in building the script, I hate calling it a script because I never wanted it memorized. I want it told and not recited, if you get my meaning. And I think Lewis knows what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
When you're on a tour, you don't want I tell them when you're starting out, it's okay to read, just let everybody know you're new and you got to learn the stories. But the goal was to tell the stories and not necessarily recite them. And on here, I don't have time to memorize the stories, guys. I have an outline, so I can tell the stories accurately. And every 2 weeks and working full time, I don't have time to memorize these stories. But anyway, the focus was stories from the area that we were walking in. That was our first goal, was to find stories, to tell stories in the area we were actually walking in, and then after that, stories from around the city, and then after that, stories from the local area. And this is one I told concerning the local area because it's not often you get a Bigfoot sighting inside city limits. It may have happened, but I don't know. But anyway, this is in Grand Bay, Alabama, about 20 minutes southwest of Mobile. This woman writes, and this is found on BFRO, the Bigfoot Research Organization website. You can actually go on there and find Bigfoot sightings from your state and I think they got them by state and then by county if there's a Bigfoot sighting. So it's a good resource if you want to find Bigfoot sightings. Just am I getting it right, Lewis? BFRO.org?
I believe so.
I don't remember. BFRO. Whoops. I think it's BFRO.org or .com. I don't remember. No, it's not org. .com. Yeah. No. Nope, that's not it. I'm not finding it right now, folks. Sorry. But it's the Bigfoot Research Organization. That's where I got this story. In 1997, about 2 o'clock in the morning, my mother and I were en route to Mobile, Alabama, from Boothville, Louisiana. It was approximately 2 a.m. We left Interstate 10 traveling north toward the Dawes community, where my mother grew up. Most of our family still reside. We crossed the smaller of two bridges in close proximity to one another when we saw what we first thought must be a very large dog sitting on the opposite lane of the road. So they're driving down and they see over on the left-hand side what looks like a big dog, but it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Remember, they're just seeing from their headlights. As we approached, we saw the creature was sitting on its haunches like a dog would do, but was face to face with us in the car. They were driving an 80s model Pontiac Parisienne. That was a tank of a car, if you've ever seen one. It showed no fear and did not so much as budge as we passed it. It did turn its head to watch us as we drove by. Unlike a dog, the creature had a human-like face, and that was the only part of its body not covered in a long reddish-brown hair. Even seated on its haunches, the creature was about the height of an average man, which is what, 5'7" to 6 foot or so? On its haunches, and it's already as tall as I am. Wow. It was more slender in build than the average Bigfoot we've seen portrayed in reports of sightings in the northern part of the U.S. We don't want to say this was a Bigfoot, but after watching a special on the History Channel, my mother and I agree that the similarities are enough that they contacted the Bigfoot Research Organization to report this. 6 foot or so on its haunches.
Wow.
That's a
Wow.
big critter. You know,
Yes.
I mean, I wouldn't want to stop. I would want, I would hope I had a camera or video or something to catch it as I go by, but I would not want to stop. That's a big old feller. Now, this one's kind of special. In Washington State, the Washington State Department of Transportation, the DOT in Washington, has some traffic cams set up, and they caught something on their cameras. Let's see. Let's start with this one. They shared the camera's photographs showed here. It's looks to be something walking on a hill just above the highway. They tweeted this out, and if you look closely by the tree on the left, there looks like there is something. It's a dark anthropomorphic figure, can certainly be seen walking. That's it, cleared up. Now, is that tree trunk or what? But here's a close-up shot.
Mm.
Who knows? Did they catch Bigfoot on the traffic cam? Pretty cool. I wonder if people see it as they're driving by. Oh, did you see the Bigfoot video? I saw it on a Paranormal Caught on Camera, but I had found the video and we did it on one of the shows when I was in Tennessee of the Bigfoot chunking a rock at the guy.
No.
He's out there hiking and he's videotaping. I think he was looking for something and he definitely found it, but he sees a creature walk up and crouch down behind a tree. Now the tree was only about this big, and this big thing is trying to crouch behind the little tree. So it's still seen. But anyway, the guy's watching it and kind of walking closer. The next thing you see is this big arm come around the tree and sling a rock at the dude. And on the video, you can hear it land nearby, which guess what guess what the hiker did at that point? He took off.
Oh, of course.
He's like, I'm done here. I'm done here. This thing's chunking rocks at me. So, all right, let's do some UFO. Or do you have any Bigfoot sightings?
I don't off the top of my head.
Okay. All right. UFO or UAP sightings. Now, this is all happening on highways, folks. Get out there and take a road trip. There's no telling what you'll see. Which reminds me, no, I'll save that for the next section. We're just going to go over these real quick because I want to get to the other. There's some strange ones in the other. I did it in categories. I did the vanishing hitchhiker and the ghost cars and the time slips and the Bigfoot, or I did cryptids and different sightings, and then UFO. And then I just got a section called other. I want to get to that because there's some weird stuff. You've probably heard of this one, Route 75 in Rachel, Nevada. It's also known as the Extraterrestrial Highway. And does anybody know what Route 375 passes?
Area 51.
Area 51. UFO seekers drive along this road hoping to spot something out of this world. Drivers should keep their eyes on the road, of course, and let passengers look toward the sky for any mysterious lights. This person reported in, my mom and I had a light following us for 20 miles, not a helicopter or plane. It would move side to side and then front to back. The radio went out and then it was gone. So something was following them. Oh, we get this. There's a couple of these, but I didn't go into any of them. I just did the one. An extraterrestrial collision. August 27, 1979, in Warren, Minnesota, about 20 miles from the North Dakota border. Marshall County Sheriff's Deputy Val Johnson was on patrol in the early morning on Highway 5 when he saw a bright light to the south on Highway 220. Johnson thought maybe a crashed semi or a downed plane, but as he approached it, he said the light instantly jumped through the windshield, hitting him like a 200-pound pillow, knocking him out. His reaction was preserved in the actual radio call to dispatch when he awoke. The operator, 407, what is your condition? Deputy, I don't know. Something just hit my car. Dispatch, what's your condition? Are you okay? Johnson, something attacked my car. I heard the glass breaking and the brakes locked up. I don't know what's going on. According to the sheriff's office investigation reports, Johnson's wristwatch and the clock on the 1977 Ford Limited Cruiser stopped working for 14 minutes. Johnson said his teeth were fractured at the gum line and his eyes burned. He says, my eyes were extremely painful, as if I had been subjected to something like an arc welder burn. Have you ever seen anything like that? When I was in high school in shop class, we had this one guy that wanted to weld without the mask. I don't know if he thought he was being tough or what it was, but the next day he came to school and his eyes were burnt red, and I mean, it was like two giant raccoon masks around on his face that was red. It was just like two red. I mean, his face was just burnt in two red circles around his eyes. Wow. And I'm like, you are the idiot. And of course, I never got the hang of welding. It would have been nice to have had a career doing that because those guys make good money, but I just never could get the hang of it. Just like I can't get the hang of video games today. I don't know what it is. His story and injuries mystified the nation, but there's another piece of evidence that still brings the curious to Marshall County. He said, this is the big thing they come to see, showing actual damage to the car. He said, whatever hit him started with a broken headlight, and up there is the weird dent on top of the hood, broke the windshield, hit the reflector, and bit both of the antenna. The sheriff's office back in 79 brought out experts from Honeywell and the Ford Motor Company to examine the damage. I've never seen anything like this before, said Ford crash investigator. He said, I feel that whatever he told me about the light and the strange incident is true. I don't doubt him in any way. And let's see. The chief investigator for the Center of UFO Studies says the biggest mystery about the Val Johnson case is trying to find one neat explanation for something that could behave the way he described, yet create the kind of damage that we discovered.
Wow.
It's just something hit his car, or did he hit
Mhm.
a UFO? Did he hit the craft? Was there a collision? Ooh, wouldn't you hate to? How do you file the insurance papers?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Before we close out, did you have a UFO story?
Actually, I do. This was a story that happened here in Troup County, and I'm wearing my Troup County
Yeah.
Archives T-shirt.
Yes.
And this happened out on Salem Road, which is out in the county just outside of LaGrange. Um, there have been a number of reports of people experiencing paranormal activity along that
Mhm.
road, but I believe it was back in 1997. A driver was driving along the road around 9 o'clock at night, and he topped a hill. And as he got to the top of the hill, and his headlights lit up the other side of the hill, he noticed all of these dark hooded beings all out in the middle of the road, and they all kind of scrambled for the shadows.
Hmm.
And he of course braked his car and watched as all of these beings ran off into the shadows and just vanished.
Wow.
But he ended up telling this story to a local UFO researcher, and then and the researcher went on to say that he thought that this might be aliens. I kind of think it was probably more of a ghost story, but several months later, this UFO researcher hears from another driver on the same road around the same time at night, who's driving down the road, and um, suddenly feels that there's somebody sitting in the passenger seat, and he turns around, and there is this dark hooded figure sitting in his passenger seat.
Oh,
Of course, the driver hits his brakes,
no. Yeah.
and as he turns to see what this figure is up to, the discovers that the passenger seat is entirely empty. And now, like I said, this UFO researcher seemed to think that this was possibly connected with a lot of the UFO activity we've had in the area.
Oh, okay.
But it's one of those things that could possibly go either way. It could be perhaps a ghost story, or
Right.
maybe it is an alien.
But so there had been a lot of UFO sightings in the area.
Yes, yes. And
Okay.
around that time, this area had become known as the Troop Herd Corridor. And
I remember you
it was
talking about that.
considered, I believe it was the third best place in the country to see a UFO, right there in the in mid 90s.
Wow. Yeah, I remember you talking about that on
Mhm.
what was the MUFON show that we did.
Yes.
Yes. The Troop County, or no, it wasn't Troop County corridor, it was Troop and the other name.
Troop Herd Corridor,
Troop
which
Herd,
is
yeah.
that includes Herd County just north of us.
Right. So they were saying those two counties is where a lot of these sightings were taking place.
Yes.
And so when they saw these hooded beings, they just made the connection. It was all happening
Yes.
at the same time.
Right.
That what was that video? Somebody came across. It was all over YouTube for a while. Come across this circle of hooded beings, like on the side of a deserted road.
Yes. Yes.
I can't remember the settings or anything now. Just when you mentioned that I could remember seeing that video of all these hooded people in a amateur video, and I don't even remember what happened in it, but wow. Yeah, I could see where a connection could be made. Is all this is going on in this area, and they see something.
Certainly.
I thought you were going to say that he looked over in the seat and saw a gray alien sitting there. But maybe they were wearing a robe and a hoodie.
They were trying to disguise themselves.
That's right. Blend in. All right. Before we close out, we're almost at an hour and a half. I want to talk about some other strange things that have happened on our highways. This one person reports that they were driving home from work about 2 a.m. It was a beautiful night, so I decided to take a route home that was more in the country instead of through town. I had to cross an old bridge that had been there probably 80 to 100 years. There's no houses or lights except my headlights. Just as my front tires hit the bridge, a red fog rolls in across it. The hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I got across that bridge as fast as possible. After I got across, I looked in my mirror, and the fog was gone, but it looked like someone was standing in the middle of the bridge. I mentioned it to my parents the next morning, and my dad said he had always heard stories about that bridge, and supposedly a young lady hung herself from it. I'd never heard another story of red fog. We've heard stories of mist, but a red fog. I wonder what that would entail. I just don't even see any correlation anywhere, but it's strange. Mm-hmm. It's unusual.
Most definitely.
All right. This story is set just south of Erie, Pennsylvania. That would be a cool place to live, wouldn't it? Erie, Pennsylvania. On a covered bridge, another covered bridge. We could have done these in our Haunted Bridges show, built around 1868. Of course, when we were doing that show, I was looking for haunted bridges stories. I came across these looking for haunted highway stories. So, but get Will Eric a hold of some of these. He probably knows about these because since he did it, he actually seriously wrote the book on covered bridges. If you don't know, he wrote a book about covered bridges in Alabama. So he literally wrote the book on covered bridges. All right, this covered bridge was built around 1868, stretching 84 feet across Elk Creek. The Gudgeonville Bridge claimed its first life a little over 100 years ago. Legend says that a farmer named Obadiah Will was delivering a mule to a nearby farm when the animal suddenly began acting strangely. It led Obadiah down the road to the entrance of the covered bridge, but stopped short, unwilling to cross. Frustrated, the farmer snapped the reins a few times to get the mule moving, but to no avail. The balking mule refused to take another step. Unable to turn around on the narrow bridge or to go forward, Obadiah grew more and more enraged, flogging the poor beast until he literally beat him to death. It is said that after having so brutally killed the animal, the farmer unhitched him from the wagon and buried him along the bank of the creek. Years later, a young girl playing along with the Devil's Backbone, where the cliffs above the creek are called the Devil's Backbone, she fell to her death and drowned in the rushing water. When her family went to look for her, all they ever found was her left shoe. Today, locals say that if you park on the Gudgeonville Bridge and roll the windows down, you can hear the clanking of hoofs. The mistreated mule will be approaching your car. It's also said that along the banks walks the young girl wearing just one shoe. Don't linger too long or she may get her hands on your shoe, maybe with your legs still attached. That's a typical ghost story.
Well, my question would be, after the guy beat the mule to death, how did he move the carcass to bury it beside the bridge?
There you go. My thoughts exactly. Because I mean, it may have been one of those that was completely covered, even the sides, or at least was small. Because at first I thought, well, maybe he just dumped it over into the river. But this says he moved him. But you're right. How? Oh. Clinton Road in Passaic County, New Jersey. They have ghost sightings, KKK meetings, witches, and even druidic ceremonies all on one road. Well, at least that's how the rumors go about the Clinton Road. After a sharp dead man's curve, you'll come to the Ghost Boy Bridge. Here's another bridge. So this is like Haunted Bridges 2, Bridges of Sorrow 2 almost.
Yes.
We're going into more bridges. After a sharp dead man's curve, you'll come to the Ghost Boy Bridge, where legend says if you toss a coin into the water, a boy will toss it back. A little further up the road are the ruins of Cross Castle, thought to be a hotbed for satanic activities and even the KKK. And there's also a jungle habitat that closed years ago, and there may be all sorts of terrifying wild animals roaming the woods along this road. Wow. And then Mona Lisa Drive in New Orleans. Legend says that a rich local man donated a collection of statuary with the stipulation that they create one statue to pay tribute to his deceased daughter, Mona. The details around the legend of Mona's death are murky, but supposedly Mona and the sailor she loved used to walk hand in hand through what is now New Orleans City Park. But their love did not last. One version has her father forbidding the romance and Mona killing herself. Another says the sailor didn't really love her at all and dumped her, and that the reaction from Mona was so violent that he killed her to silence her. Sadly, people eventually destroyed her memorial statue in City Park. Today, she is said to haunt young lovers who drive down Mona Lisa Drive. Couples hoping to do a little parking along Mona Lisa Drive may hear a woman moaning in heartache and even scratching at their windows. I know this is a family show, but I don't think they're hearing the ghost. If they're in the little Lover's Lane area, that's probably not the ghost of Mona. And that name, that's not well, maybe it is an appropriate name for the situation if that's where it happens. So I'm trying to say, above board with all this because we are a family show. All right. You have any other strange stuff on highways?
Well, there's another bridge story that I thought I might want to include. This takes place near where the Ravenel Memorial Bridge now stands in Charleston, South Carolina. And back in 1946, there was a bridge there called the John Grace Memorial Bridge. And one evening, or maybe it was early morning, a cargo ship rammed the bridge and actually took out a section, about a 240-foot section of the bridge. And there was a family traveling over the bridge at the same time in a green Oldsmobile. And the family who was actually traveling out on vacation, they ended up, their car fell into the water and the family was killed. But the bridge was repaired. And then later, people started to see this odd green Oldsmobile crossing the bridge. And the family of 5 is inside the car, all staring straight ahead with lifeless eyes. Eventually, the John Grace Memorial Bridge was torn down, and it was replaced with the current bridge that's there. And supposedly, those sightings have stopped. But I've always thought that was just a really great story.
Yeah, I mean, it could fit basically any of the criteria here: time slip, a ghost car. Oh, that's wild. So they see the whole family.
Yes.
The green car with the whole family in it. Wow. All right, one last one. Kelly Road in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. It's also known as the Mystery Mile, and it is believed that this small portion of the road has a bad aura, causing people to lose their temper and become vicious and violent for no apparent reason. Reports in the area mention sudden behavior changes in animals, movements in the shadows, and strange sounds that seem to have no origin. And if you're not spooked enough, the road curves through thick and dark forest patches. So be aware. The road is 1.6 miles long, running north to south from Ingle Road to Wolf Run Road, and it's totally paved. Although there is no urban legend mentioning exactly what causes the bad aura, some believe that the Native Americans cursed the road when the land was taken away from them. Nowadays, there are rumors of rituals and cult activity occurring in the forest near Kelly Road. The popular theory is that the supernatural occurrences are possibly linked to that curse. But whatever the cause, if you reach the 1 mile marker, the disturbances cease. And there's been rumors of cult activity within the forest that have only increased the legends. Now, I mean, people drive through the area and all of a sudden their personality changes. Now, how weird is that?
I don't know that I've heard that at any other place.
Yeah, Kelly Road, Mystery Mile. I mean, you just drive into the area and then all of a sudden people start acting strange. They say the animals even act strange. You know, that if the animals are going through the area, they act strange. Wow. That's definitely a strange highway that I would actually recommend avoiding. So if you find yourself in that area of Pennsylvania, stay away from Kelly Road, the Mystery Mile. So, final thoughts, Lewis?
Stay away from Kelly Road.
Hey, it reminds me of the song we used to do in the band, Copperhead Road. I used to love doing that song. You better stay away from Copperhead Road, but we could change that to Kelly Road. Yeah, I've never heard of that. That's why I wanted to include it, because it was just strange. You know, you're traveling down the road and then all of a sudden the whole atmosphere changes and then people's attitudes get sour. And, you know, I mean, what could be the cause of that? I mean, too many times we do blame the Indians. And I honestly, I mean, we've talked, I think we may have talked about it before, but I know we've talked about it with Elizabeth, how, to me, inappropriate that is. I mean, we just automatically, well, the Indians, you know, it was sacred burial ground. You know, I mean, I mean, you don't know. Right. I mean, there could have been something here before the Indians that caused all that. You know, I mean, it could have been, you know, a killing ground for the T-Rex or something. Who knows? You know, I mean, at least in California, they have the La Brea tar pits, and you know, that was a killing ground. And you know, who's to say that there's not paranormal activity there because of all of the death? But even in that was a natural thing. And you know, we've mentioned it before, but this is what we've talked about with Elizabeth. Just, I mean, in most areas in the United States, Indians lived there.
Yes.
And they were normal people, not normal like us, obviously, because thousands of years, but they lived their daily lives and they just wanted to eat and sleep and raise their families. I mean, there was, and most of them were probably just as spiritual as we are. You know, I mean, I think the surveys say most people do believe in God and most people do believe in spirituality. Not everyone are religious. Everyone believes in their own way, but the Indians could have been the same way.
Yes.
You know, but we think, and because of movies and television, we've made them uber religious and uber superstitious. And we say, well, the Indians lived here, so they placed a curse on the land. We don't know that, you know.
Right.
There's unless you find something that says, you know, the Indians were here and they did this to place a curse, and you find all the what they call the medicine bags or whatever, then you might be able to say that there was a curse. But just because the Indians lived here doesn't necessarily mean, one, that it was sacred ground or that it was cursed.
Yes.
So, but at Mystery Mile, something is going on there. And it's something weird. That's why, like I said, that's why I put it in the other, because I don't know what it is. I mean, you drive through a place and people's attitude changes. That's just odd. All right, we're going to close it down now. We've actually reached 1 hour and 40 minutes. And we have, there was actually more stories that I did not add. There was one actually over in Mississippi. What was it? I was looking at it before the last show.
Three-Legged Lady Road?
No, it was something over close to where Beth lives. Murder Road or something like that.
Yes.
I mean, it's when I was researching on it, I was reading like a forum, and some people say, well, it's not there. It's actually over here, and it's not that road. It's this road. But they talked about some weird stuff that happened, and I didn't add that story in. There was a lot of others, but thank you guys for being here. We do appreciate it. Is there anyone here with us? Did you hear that? Can you tell us your name? And in 1 week, remember, we'll be back with our next SJ Revisited with Lewis Powell, the second half of his first show. You got that orientation down.
Yes.
But I see. There, I got you now. The second half of his first show with us, Southern Spirit Guide, where he's telling some more spooky tales from around the South. And then our next live show in 2 weeks. Who knows? I had something planned and I had to change it, so I'm not sure what we're going to do. Dagny, one of our ETs, had a good recommendation that I think we may pursue, but I got to dig into that. It's like the Mysterious Booms show that we did, all about the boom boom. I'd been wanting to do it for a long time and then just couldn't, didn't think there was enough out there. And I'd go in and look, and I'm like, no, there's not enough. Then I come back later and there's not enough. And then finally I went back and looked, and I was like, oh my God. And we filled a whole show with stories of mysterious booms. So we'll probably do that we will be back in 2 weeks with our live show. Not sure exactly what it's going to be, but Lewis, thank you for being here as always. Appreciate your stories and jumping in. Tim had to leave us, but thank you, Tim. And we're going to close it down and see you in 1 week with SJ Revisited, Southern Spirit Guide Part 2. And in 2 weeks, something strange. All right. Y'all be strange out there. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.